Just a quick side note before we get started as well. Of course, we're doing these events to try and keep some normality, keep up the social activity, maintain some engagement with you all. But also, and as always, the CTOs in London and our other communities have always been about coming together, sharing and supporting each other. So we also want to use our reach for the better during all this and help raise some money for the National Emergencies Trust Coronavirus Appeal. They're doing some great work in distributing funds to local charities who in turn are helping the vulnerable during what's definitely a difficult time for some. We'd really appreciate any donations, no matter how small. The link's on the event page already, but I'll post into the comments section here shortly. I think that's the last few people. We are recording this, by the way, so anyone who's just joined and missed that, that'll be on YouTube soon. Right, so that's enough for me. I'm going to pass you over to Michael now to get started. He's definitely seen his fair share of challenges throughout quite an impressive career. So he's going to share some insights on those and hopefully some useful advice for all of us during this. Regarding any questions, there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end, so please do wait until the end. Keep yourselves muted throughout, use the raise hand button if you've got something to ask, and then at the end we'll call out names. You can unmute yourself or hold down the spacebar button to ask some questions. So over to you, Michael.
Well, thanks, Matt. And you know, when Matt sent out a call for looking for speakers and things, and let me just pin the video. And about this time, I raised my hand. Actually, I gave him a call right away because I know everybody communicates by email so much, but I'm like, I think I want to call Matt and learn more about this group, because I wish we're meeting under better circumstances if this is the first time that you've heard me speak or anything, because as a leader, this is maybe the most difficult thing that you'll ever go through. This is maybe the most difficult time you'll ever go through. I mean, this is truly unprecedented times. You know, I've been on the phone with business owners, senior leaders for the last couple of weeks, walking them through layoffs, walking them through furloughs, getting rid of entire development teams, because obviously this is a time where we have to take a serious look and make very, very difficult decisions as leaders, and make them quickly without all the information, for example, we think we would want, or without really knowing what's going to happen in the future. So if you're out there, you've probably laid off, you know, your team might be a fraction of what it used to be. You know, your team might be going through a lot of fear. You're probably going through fear yourself and uncertainty yourself. All this is normal. It's absolutely normal. But there are also a lot of tools and skills that you can do to be the type of leader that your team needs right now. Because it's more important for you than ever to be this type of leader. And I just want to give you a quick overview of my background. So, you know, I started out as a programmer. I went on to found, scale, and sell a couple of my own software companies. Then I went on to earn a master's in psychology. You know, I spent a lot of time in enterprise software, that's Microsoft Dynamics and SAP. You know, I was at the time the CTO for my own company until I hired a CTO. Now I work with companies like Uber, Microsoft, SAP, Salesforce. They bring me in to teach their leaders. And I specialize in teaching, helping people go through the same transformation I did, which was a very, very good technical person into a really strategic, influential, confident leader. Because you know, I'm a bit introverted and I'm very analytical. When I started my own company, I realized I'm a really crappy leader, so I better learn communication, emotional intelligence, all these different things, how to create a high-performing team very quickly. And, you know, so I studied a lot and made a lot of changes in myself to be able to be that kind of leader. It really worked out because my companies were listed on the Inc. 5000 list. We were voted best place to work, won Social Entrepreneur of the Year. And that was on the outside. On the inside, I really enjoyed giving back to the community. I enjoyed empowering my team. I enjoyed really adding the value to the customers. And so that's what I teach organizations and leaders now. But through that process, I've been through a lot of crises myself. So I'm obviously American. I live outside of London now in Hazelmere near Guildford. I married a lovely British woman. So I've been here for about a year and a half. And through my business career, first of all, I've been through 9/11. I worked for a North American software company, and I saw what 9/11 did. The terrorist attacks, in the U.S. and globally really had the effect on leaders. So that was a major crisis. A couple of years later, I had a really nasty thing happen to me. And there's a long, dramatic story about this, but I had a key employee when I owned a company that I gave some equity to. So he was a business partner. Me and him had a disagreement. He actually assaulted me, and he got so angry he hit me, and that started. The story has restraining orders, substance abuse, lawsuits, armed security guards, all these different things, and I really thought through that. I thought I was going to lose everything. I thought I was going to lose my business. I thought I was going to really have to really, I don't know. It's just the most negative, hardest thing I've ever been through in my life. So that was another crisis. So I really learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about organizationally what you have to do in leadership through those two crises. And then the Great Recession, 2008, 2009 came, when obviously the bottom fell out of everything. And I was ready for it. I was ready for, mentally and emotionally. I was ready for it organizationally. We actually doubled the size of our company through those times. I was able to make an acquisition for dirt cheap. I paid $10,000 to basically double the size of my company, right? Because we were in a good position. And there's a lot that leaders can do in crises to make things better for themselves, their team, and their organization. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because what's at stake for all leaders right now is, and by the way, you don't have to take notes on these. I'll give you a way to download these slides at the end. The fact is, when a crisis comes, this is really when people determine what their reputation is going to be. Because when things get tough, that's when leaders need to step up. And your team, your organization, even your friends, even your family. The thing is, you're a role model. So the people in your sphere, your friends, your family, they all look up to you. Your team looks up to you. Your peers are looking to see what you do as a leader. So it's more important now than ever that you bring your best, you bring your A game, that you really become a strong, powerful leader, decisive leader now. And it's more difficult to be a great leader now because you're under a lot of pressure. You're under a lot of stress. Again, you don't have all the information you need. You have to make decisions quickly in this type of environment. You have to make very difficult decisions also in this environment. And at the end of the day, a question to ask yourself is, in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years down the road, how are you going to look back upon this? And how are other people going to remember you as a leader during this time? Because they're going to remember this for a long, long period. When 9/11 hit, for example, the mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, and actually George W. Bush, both of them didn't have a great reputation, really stepped it up after 9/11. And they really had a good reputation that followed them after it. Rudy Giuliani's done some crazy things since then. Or if you look at Winston Churchill, everybody remembers what he did during World War II over here. And that reputation really can follow you because people need a leader in a time of crisis more than ever. So it's really, really important that you understand the gravity of this situation. Now, I've been spending, I'm a big believer in data, right? So I've spent a lot of time talking to employees out there. So I'm going to tell you first what I'm hearing from employees. Then I'm going to show you some statistics about employees and teams right now, because as leaders, we need to know what our teams are going through. Then I'm going to talk about what leaders are saying. And then I'm going to talk to you about psychologically why these things are happening, because I'm a psychology guy. And then we're going to talk about what you need to do about it. So here's what I'm hearing from employees, that everybody's handling it different. Out there. So everybody has their own way of going through this, but there's a lot of feeling isolated and separated from the team. And what comes up is a lot of their fear and anxiety, about, are they going to continue to have their job? What's going to happen to the company? What's happening to the industry? So they're seeing this from this fear and anxiety is coming from all the different angles. Guilt comes up a lot. A lot of people are feeling guilty. Maybe you're even having these feelings of guilt. Why am I working when others aren't? Am I doing enough? Some people live in a house with other people that are on furlough, they've been laid off, and there's this guilt that they're actually still working. Or am I doing enough? Am I doing enough for the company to keep my job? They kept me, so am I doing enough for this? And people are feeling overwhelmed and not safe and not secure. And actually, the word on the street is productivity is up. But people are worried about that because people are working too much, because they're struggling with their family, their kids, and themselves, and they're getting burnt out. A company just hired my wife to do some group coaching with their team, and the message is to stop working so much, because they're not finding that balance between work and not work. And so they're working these massive hours, and then they're getting burned out, and they're showing signs of stress, which we'll talk about later. And what the important thing, what I'm hearing is that people aren't getting what they need from management. They're not getting communication and direction, they're not getting good enough communication from and with the direction where the company's going, where their team's going. They're not getting the emotional support. They're not getting that hope and the inspiration that they need right now. And they are yearning for strong, vulnerable, authentic leadership. They really need their leaders to connect with them, to be honest with them, to be strong with them, and to bring them through this. And they're not getting it. Now, these are just from my bunch of conversations. Now, Qualtrics did a study really recently, but not recently enough, because we're a bit through April now. So this is the end of March and early April. So I'm going to show you some statistics from a couple of weeks ago, but I can tell you that they're worse now because the last couple of weeks have had more of this uncertainty. So 45%, almost 50% say their mental health has declined since the quarantine started. 77% report higher levels of stress. Now, what does these, let me just check this chat. All right, gotcha. And so what do these mental health symptoms look like? People are emotionally exhausted. I get this too. I've been feeling really, really tired often, and this big feeling of sadness all the time, more irritable. My wife and I, we both talk about this, how it seems like we're a bit fast to snap at each other, etc. People aren't sleeping as well, anger, guilt, what we talked about. Also, what the survey said is 56% do not feel comfortable bringing these issues up to their managers. So, they're feeling these things, yet they don't feel safe and secure enough to talk about these. 53% said their manager is not attuned to their well-being, and 60% don't feel supported by their manager through this time. So just remember what I said. What I found, what the stats said, is people aren't getting what they need from the management and their leadership, and they're really yearning for that. This is really important that you get them this information. Now, here's what I'm hearing from leaders, right? What I'm hearing from leaders is, I ask my team how they're doing, and they're like, yeah, everything's good. And I'm like, I don't think it's good, but they're not telling me it's good. And right, this is the other side of it, where they don't feel comfortable about saying it. So the leaders are getting, hey, everything's good, but their intuition's telling them it's not good, because they're used to the face-to-face, and they can't get this read on people. And it's like, and it's like they don't know what's truly going on. They're really worried about both their team and their own mental and emotional health. And it's like they put in some measures, like a lot of people put in some, a daily call, a little bit of humor each week, or some levity and fun, but they're like, they don't think it's nearly enough. It's not giving them, it's a step, but they need a whole staircase, right? They need a lot more steps than just this. They're feeling that everybody's working a lot, yet things aren't getting done. So everybody's really, really busy, but it's like the productivity is up, but the performance isn't up. And they're not sure what people are doing day to day, but they feel out of control, but they don't want to micromanage, because that's going to be a pain for them, and that's really going to turn people off. And they feel confused, misunderstood, like they're carrying this big burden. They're feeling guilty for a lot of reasons. Maybe they've had to let people go. Maybe they feel that they're not giving, that part of them knows that they're not giving the team what they need. They often, leaders, especially in technology, especially younger leaders, especially people that are like me, like introverted, they're not as emotionally aware, as emotionally intelligent. And then they start questioning themselves. Like, what else can I do? Maybe I'm not set out to this. My company has given me this responsibility, and here I am. They feel their team needs more. They just don't know what it is. And then and the leaders, they're really busy themselves, but they're not getting their strategic priorities done talked to a guy the other day. He's like, look, I wrote down 3 things I needed to get done today. I was busy all day, massively busy. I was busy fighting fires. A lot of bad things, hot things come up. I only got 1 out of the 3 things done, and that happens a lot. So I know what needs to get done. I just can't get to it, and that's a big problem. And they're not sure what their focus should be or the way forward, because this is such new type of things that they're dealing with. And they're lacking support and follow through, both on their own things as well as from their upper management, whether it's the owners, the board, etc. And they're feeling isolated, they're feeling alone, they're feeling directionless. No one to support them, no one to openly collaborate with them. They don't know best practices. So there's a lot going on for employees, a lot going on for leaders right now. And again, this is the time we need you. This is the time everybody is relying on you, and you need to bring your best. All right, so what does your best look like? How do you get there? Well, I'm going to put on my psychologist hat for a second, and it starts with the clear intention. I want to tell you a study that a guy named Todd Herman did. And then Todd Herman is an author and award-winning peak performance expert. And he talked to a bunch of different CEOs. So these were people running companies. And he had, and this is in the last couple of weeks, and they range from $5 million to $500 million, so all sorts of different sizes. And it was the top people in the company. And he recorded the conversations with their permission, and then he ran them through a transcription machine and did sort of like a sound cloud. And he found out that they grouped leaders into 3 different categories. One was the fear-based CEO, and that these people were coming from a place of fear. The next was the unfocused CEO, and they weren't necessarily driven by fear, but he said they sort of had their head in their sand, so they weren't really looking forward. And the third group was the strategy-focused CEOs, and they were the ones who were really focused on making action, making changes, and looking at the data and seeing what they can do to move forward. And the people that were fear-focused, they used the words like, they analyzed the words they used. They used the words like government, Trump, coronavirus, COVID, and negative future-facing words up to 13 times more than the strategy-focused group. And then the strategy-focused group, they use the words like opportunity, action, strategy, 9 to 14 or 4 to 9 times as much as the fear-focused CEOs. So. And they were the strategy-focused CEOs were much more apt to be making changes, to taking advantage of opportunities, to really looking forward than the fear-based ones. So it's really important because, as you probably know, however you show up, and it's not just the words you say, but the energy you put into things, is how the rest of your organization's going. And I think Todd was on the right thing, but I think there was on the right track. But I want to take it to 2 or 3 steps deeper, because when I say it starts with a clear intention, it's how are you showing up? How are you showing up in meetings? Because however you show up in meetings, that's going to determine the culture. The culture is not what you say. The culture is how you say it. The culture is the energy you have. The culture is how you connect with people, because however your mindset is, that's going to determine how everybody else in the company thinks and acts. And the way you want to be showing up is you want to be very authentic. You want to say, look, this is where we're at. But you want to be so forward thinking and have so much positivity. It's like, look, here's where we're going. Here's where, and we're going to get there together. And it's important that you inspire, you motivate people in each and every conversation. That said, you may go through ups and downs. In fact, you will go, you're human, you will go through ups and downs. And when you go through a little bit of a down, it's important for you to have, for example, peers or people that you can rely on to help get you through that, because you don't want to be in a down mode and go in front of your team, because they're gonna take on the energy that you have. Now, let's talk more about the psychology of teams and the psychology of stress, because I break consciousness down into 2 different areas. The first is, and you can see on the left there, the ego. And the ego is not necessarily bad, but it's been way overdeveloped, because the ego's job is comfort, control, and security. So the ego is there to protect yourself. And it comes out whenever there's fear around, because again, that's where protection comes from. And we're wired to be driven by our ego. but we don't need to be wired. We don't need to be driven by our ego anymore. And the example I give is because if you want to look at how we're wired, you have to look at like the last 10,000 years. You can't look at the last 2 or 3 generations, because wiring doesn't change in just 100, 150, 200 years. And because up until just a couple of generations ago, our body and our mind and our emotions had to really protect ourselves from physical threats. Because on the other side of this is your authentic self. But say, you know, I was a caveman 5,000 years ago, and I was really, really hungry. And here I am, I'm walking around, you know, the jungle or whatever, and I see a banana tree. I'm like, oh man, I can go get something to eat now, right? And then next to that, I see a man-eating Velociraptor. And so what's it more important for my brain to latch onto, the banana or the man-eating dinosaur? Obviously the man-eating dinosaur, right? So that is why we are geared towards our ego. We're wired for protection. And I'll give you a real life example where this probably comes up. Say you're out in London and you're talking to some friends in a square, and you know, in a public, you know, outdoor place, and you're chatting with them, and then somebody bumps you from behind, and hard enough, you know, you go forward a step, and you see, and it's just, you know, a lady with her kid, and she's like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, you know, I was paying attention to my kid, I really didn't mean it. And you're like, and you know she didn't, it was just a total accident. You're like, yeah, no problem. But your stress reaction's up, right? Your cortisol, your stress hormones, and you feel that fight or flight thing is taking, you know, your head's buzzing, you're like ready for this flight, you're ready to flee, whatever it is. And even though, you know, this poor lady didn't mean to do it, you're up, right? Because the chemicals and the hormones are rushing through your body. That just goes to show that we're still wired for protection. We're still wired for protection. Now, the other side of our consciousness is the authentic self, heart feeling, and that's a place coming from love, compassion, and integrity. Because you can only be in one state. You can either be in your ego or you can be in yourself. You're either coming from a place of fear or you're coming from a place of love. And yes, I am using love in this presentation. And when I talk about love, you know, it doesn't have to be like, oh my gosh, I love you, you know, husband or wife or kids or, you know, partner or, you know, what spouse, whatever it is. It's a place of connection. It's a place of relaxing. It's a place where you are really connected. And the reason this is important for us is that when you're coming from your ego, when you're trying to protect yourself, because, you know, when we talk about leadership, when you come from when your ego is that's where poor leadership comes from. That's micromanaging. That is, you know, holding things to controls. That's trying to control everything. That's all ego-based behavior, and that's all fear-based. And that brings out the worst in you. You can't be a great leader and be in your ego. This is where you push away. This is where you avoid people. This is where you're reactive. This is where you put up your walls, right? But if you can shift into your authentic self and come from that place, this is when you're positive. This is when you're optimistic, because you can't be positive and optimistic when you're trying to protect yourself, right? That is when you're in yourself. You're that type of leader that they're wanting. This is when you create connection. This is where authenticity and vulnerability come from. This is when you're achieving things. This is when you're responsive. This is where creativity comes from. So we have to be very cautious, and we have to be very specific of moving you out of your ego and moving to your authentic self. Because when you're in your ego, you make poor decisions. When you're in your authentic self, you make smart, rational decisions. Because nobody's ever, well, we're going to talk more about decision making in a second. Because here's what's called the disc. So everybody, there's different personality types out there, and it doesn't even really matter if you know disc or not, but just bear with me here, because everybody fits somewhere on this wheel here. And you can either be like, you know, dominant, very control oriented, very like get to the point. You can be very conscientious. This is very analytical. You can be very analytical. You can be very influential. This is like a lot of salesperson people are this way. Or steadiness. You can be like very, very steady and want to support people. Like if you're a very good analytical programmer, you're probably weighted towards this, conscientious. If you're like in the support department, you love supporting people, you're probably this. This is a lot of salespeople, and this is a lot of, just in general, a lot of CEOs and things. And, you know, for example, I fit right here on it. I'm a bit dominant, but I'm also what do you call it, analytical as well. The reason I bring this up is when you're stressed, you go further out on here. So if you are, for example, very direct and you get very stressed, you tend to get more direct. You tend to get a bit bullying, right? You're extra firm. You're not listening, and you get away from these type of things, which is what people need to do. So we end up going this way, but our team needs us to go this way. If you're very analytical and reserved and introverted and you get stressed, you want to get more reserved and more introverted, but you know what? Your team needs you to connect with them more, right? So we have to be careful, because that's what I mean by stress is going to try to bring out its worst in you. So you have to be aware of that and get more the other way. And you don't want to do that because your ego is trying to protect you. Now, when we talk about personal mindset, and if we have this little graph here, so whenever you're emotional, whenever you're in a state of fear, that's when you make your worst decisions. You cannot make good decisions from a place of fear. If you think about the worst decisions you've ever made in your life, they've been when you're in a state of fear, when you're trying to protect yourself, when you are on the attack, right? So what happens is we have three different bands here. Green is when you're making good decisions. Red is when you're making horrible decisions. Yellow is, you're in the middle there. Now, what happens is, it's funny, when I've been talking to leaders, I'm like, well, how are things going? They're like, actually, things aren't so bad, right? And then we have a really heart-to-heart talk, and I find out they're down here. And the thing is, they want to act like they're here, but they're really down here. And, I get it. You want to put up, and it's important sometimes for our when we're communicating with our teams, not to let them know that we're down here, is to make sure we communicate with them from this area. But the thing is, we have in our mind that, this is just temporary. In a day or two, I'm just going to pop out of it. I'm going to be here. We're at the beginning of this, to be quite honest with you. And if you're here or your team members are here, I hate to tell you this, best case, we have 2 or 3 more months of this. Best case, we may be in this for 6 more months. So things are going to get worse from here unless you do something about it. We need to get you up here consistently. And, in reality, you're never going to be up here. You're going to be like this. This is how life works. That's best case scenario. But we have to keep you in the green. Otherwise, there's problems. We have to keep your team in the green as well. So how do you do that? How do you identify danger signals, right? Because how practically, when you're talking or interacting with your team, I've listed a bunch of danger signals. Again, you'll be able to download this later to get this, so you can identify them yourself. But there's a couple different areas that I'll show you. So signs of extreme stress in meetings of your team. People don't show up or they're late for meetings. This is something you want to have your antenna out there for when they're not doing it. You'll be like, these people are having problems. They don't show up or they're consistently late for meetings. And I don't mean if they were on a phone with a customer, right? This is consistently or there's no good excuse. If they're on mute a lot or there's no camera and and everybody else is off of mute or their camera is showing, you want to look for exceptions. Right? Because this is them trying to protect themselves, withdraw, and not be part of the team. If they withdraw, they're not participating. Or if you ask for them participation, they're always focused on the negatives. They're defensive or argumentative whenever they do give feedback. They're always trying to pick out the problems in everything. And they got that weird energy when they do that, right? You know what that is. And so when you're communicating, you get communication from them at all sorts of hours. And this is different. So if you have a program that normally works, from 6 p.m. till 2 in the morning, and they send you something at midnight, it's not a big deal. If you have somebody else, it's normally works, 8 to 5 or something. Then all of a sudden you get stuff with them from 10, 11 at night, 3 in the morning. That's weird. You got to really look at that. Something's probably going on. Not clear communication. So you get emails or direct Slack messages or whatever it is, and you're like, man, that's just weird. I don't understand what they're saying. They're not communicating clearly. That means there's all sorts of crazy stuff up here. So they're communicating. They really know what it is. Missed or not timely responses. So if you send them an email or a DM, you don't get something back right away, or they don't get it at all. And then especially when they normally do, something is going on. When it comes to their actions, when you look at them, Did it look disheveled? Are they not showering? Do they not look professional? And you got to give some people a little bit of leeway here. And again, are they outside of their normal? But this is a big thing when people aren't showering, they aren't eating healthy, they're not sleeping. How do they look on Zoom or video? Are they taking sick days? And it's good if they take sick days proactively, but are they just, maybe a couple of times they just say, hey, I need a day off without any warning. Maybe they're getting headaches. Maybe they're getting stomach issues. Maybe you hear them talking to you or somebody else about those. Those are all massively sick things. And again, especially if they normally don't have it, their performance decreases. If they are complaining or other people are complaining against them and like grievances, if they're always looking to blame things, it's a victimhood mentality. That's what we're looking for, this victimhood mentality. Or if their work sleep patterns have changed, like I just mentioned, all of a sudden they're working weird hours. Emotionally, if they're twitchy or nervous, what is their body language showing you? What is their voice that telling you? Mood swings. Are they, all of a sudden really happy and then all of a sudden really, really down for a while? They're not motivated. Their commitment's lacking. Their confidence is down. Their increased emotional actions. Maybe they get a little tearful or sad or sensitive or aggressive on different calls when things come up. These are all the things you have to be looking for. And again, it's you should have a baseline of your team, and are they deviating from that baseline in any way? What's at risk? So what's at risk when we're talking about this major stress? The team members, they're going to get burnt out, they're going to take an extended sick leave, or they're going to quit. That's the first thing. Their performance will drastically suffer, and then your team's performance will drastically suffer. You and your team are going to miss deadlines and deliverables. Your team culture will plummet. A couple of people going through this will really bring down your team, or if you're not getting this yourself, will really bring down your team. They're going to lose respect for you as a leader because they need things from you right now that you may not be delivering, and it's going to let the organization down. It's going to let the organization down. Now, you have a choice, and let me tell you about, as a leader, a story from my own. It's a vulnerable story from my own history about all these things. I was in before I started my own company, I worked in the U.S. Then they moved me to Europe, and then I quit that job, and I was in charge of Southeast Asia for sales and marketing for a software company. And I came out to Singapore, and I was running this region, and I had a team of about 4 or 5 people out there that were all locals. I came out there as I was young, I was really arrogant, I was driven and intelligent and had some good results, but I came out there really arrogant, right? And I met with my team, and I'm like, all right, we're going to do it the American way. I know better. I don't care about the local customer, the local cultures, how you've been doing things will work for you. Screw that. We're going to do it my way. So I come out here, this hotshot American, right? This hotshot, the high performer. And honestly, within 6 weeks, all 5 of my team had quit because I was so arrogant. And I was like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? And back then, a long time ago, I smoked, as you do in Asia. I remember after the last person quit, I go down there and I was smoking a cigarette. I always remember because I was sitting at this bench outside smoking a cigarette. And the cigarette is about 1/3 of the way down. And I'm like, you know what? I did screw up. This was totally on me. I take full responsibility. One of the biggest screw ups of my life at that point so far. And I go, I'm gonna give myself to the rest of this cigarette to feel sorry for myself because life does suck. And I said, then I'm going to pull it together and I'm going to get myself out of there. So I smoked that cigarette. I felt down about it. And then after that cigarette, I put it out. And I'm like, all right, now's my time to step up. And I'm like, look, I'm going to be humble. I'm going to ask for help. I'm going to do whatever it takes. And it sounds funny, but I visualize myself putting on like a superhero outfit, like a Superman type thing. And I'm like, I'm going to need this. It's going to suck. I'm going to work my butt off. And, over the next couple of weeks, I went out and did sales myself. When I wasn't doing sales, I recruited a new team and I built a team back up from scratch. And we ended up having great success. I sold 2 of the largest deals ever for Microsoft the 2 biggest deals ever for Microsoft in their business solutions in Asia over the next couple of months, year and a half. I was very proud of that, but that was because I went through a very difficult time and told myself to suck it up. I'm going to bring my best. And so you have a choice too. If your team is struggling, that's okay. That's normal. That's human. But the fact is you got to make this choice to get out of it. You got to make this choice of, are you going to ask for help? Are you going to do whatever it takes? Are you going to take the smart choices to get out of it? That's your choice right now. And so the 3 steps to leading your team out of this, I told you at the beginning, I'm going to tell you the title of this was, what 3 steps do you need to take to really be the leader that your team needs and get them out of this crisis that you and your organization needs and your team needs and your family needs right now? First is to get clear on that mindset and your intentions. Are you ready to really become a leader? Because you probably, if you're like me or like a lot of other CTOs or technical leaders, you probably rely a lot on your background, on your technical ability. Well, you know, right now it's not about your technical ability, it's your ability as a human, as a leader. So now's the time for you to grow a lot in a very short period of time, to listen to the experts, to really get that backup to get you there. Second is, you got to identify your team's true needs, because they're coming from a place of fear. You probably don't know if it's good, you probably have an idea that your team is struggling a little bit. You are probably struggling a bit, but are you and your team struggling a little bit? Is it a little bit of a problem, or is it a big problem? And most people, and again, remember this was done a couple of weeks ago, that they are probably struggling and they're not bringing it up to you. And there's a better than 50% chance a couple of weeks ago. Now it's probably better than 75% chance. And so you have to identify your team's true needs and then deliver on those needs. So it's a 3-step process. And let me go through this process in a second. So, and again, here's what's at risk. There's a lot at risk. Now, first of all, and I'm going to get to questions in a second. So if you have questions, either think of them, put them in the chat. Matt, if you're there, maybe you can note down the questions. What's easiest, Matt, is for you to gather the questions and then ask me the questions, so I don't have to look at the chat, so I can focus on answering the questions. So if you have questions, put them in the chat. Matt's going to ask me the questions in a couple of minutes, so I'm going to get there and I have time to answer all your questions. In the meantime, I'm just going to finish up a couple of quick key points so everybody has them. So when it comes to getting clear on your mindsets and intentions, you can do that pretty much right now. You can say, all right, am I going to be the type of leader? Am I going to take these steps to be a leader? You can answer that yes or no. And chances are you're going to answer yes, because it's a great growth opportunity and people need you. Second is identify your team's true needs. So what I have, and I'm going to tell you how to take the next step on this in a second, is I have a survey, and we can send a survey. It's an anonymous survey out to your team. And the survey is going to be, everybody answers it. Nobody knows who, and I'm very clear with the team, nobody knows who's answering what, but it's going to give you a temperature check. So you'll know specifically where your team's at mentally and emotionally, performance-wise right now. So we need to know what you need to do to deliver on those needs. So again, we want to deal with data right now. We don't want to take guesses. We don't take what we hope it is. We want to deal with data right now. And that way you can choose how to deliver on those needs. You know what? I also have a survey for leaders. So I could also do is throw in my leader survey as well. So you can take that yourself. So if you want to do this, first of all, if you want the slides and then you want to know about the survey, so you go to tiny.cc/crisis-slides. You'll put in your name and email. You can it'll send you an email link to download the slides. If you're interested in the survey, then what it is, you book a call with me on the next page. It's going to be about a 20-minute call. I want to understand your situation, and then I'll tell you about how we deploy the survey, and then we'll get that out to you. And then there's my email on the bottom if you want to ever reach out to me. So those are your action steps. If what I said made sense, if you want to be this type of leader, if you want the slides and you want to look into deploying the survey to your team, those are the steps you're going to take. So you can take that right, and you can do that right now as we're going through these things, so that you make sure you get it done. All right, Matt, you still there, buddy? I'm talking and talking. Hopefully everybody's still there. Hopefully people are getting value out of this. So Matt, are you still there? Do we have any questions?
Yeah, still here. One question so far from Ravi. This is when you were talking about the DISC profiles. He says, how do you establish a baseline? I'm guessing this is more about noticing change rather than establishing a baseline in personalities. But if you could expand on that a little bit, that would be great.
Yeah, great question, and thanks for that. And you're right in a way, Matt. You know, when I talk about a baseline, you unless the person is very new to your team, you have the baseline. You know, does this person normally talk a certain, you know, listen to your intuition and looking for all the clues. So, you know, your baseline is how they've been showing up the last couple of days, or sorry, weeks, months, years that they worked in your team or you've known them, right? So the baseline, if somebody normally works from, you know, noon till 8 p.m., that's their baseline. And if they've been doing that the last couple of years, and then all of a sudden you get an email from them at midnight and then at 1 in the morning, they're outside of the norm or the baseline. If normally they're dressed professionally, right, and their hair is always combed or whatever it is, and you know, if they're, you know, male, maybe they shave, and they've been doing that, and all of a sudden they show up unshaved, or they're late, or they're not doing, and maybe they're always on video, but then they're not on video, and you're like, hey, show your video. They're like, oh, I'm not, you know, dressed or showered or something. Then it's outside of their baseline. Baseline, maybe, you know, think of it as the normal. Anytime people are out of their normal, and they're and even if normally people put in 8 hours, now they're putting in 12 hours, that's outside of the normal. They might be heading for burnout. They might be going through a lot of guilt. That's what I mean by that. Hopefully that makes sense, Matt.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, makes sense to me. Does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to just jump in and speak if anyone has a question.
I raise my hand if I don't mind. Okay, firstly, thank you for the presentation. I thought quite a few of those points really are relevant to me personally, and quite inspired by that. My question was around what employees need right now: strong and vulnerable and authentic leadership. If we look at sort of around us right now, I think most people would agree that our politicians right now aren't exactly exemplary of these qualities. I was wondering, in your opinion, who might we look up to find these qualities?
Yeah, my wife really follows the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda. I'm not saying that name right, but she there's been a couple, say it again.
Jacinda Ardern.
Jacinda Ardern.
I'm from New Zealand. So
okay, great. And there's been a couple crises. I think she dealt with a terrorist attack where she handled it really, really well. With some of these things that are happening now, she's coming in and really addressing the issue. She did a presentation just for kids, which I thought was really, really cool. And she is you get a sense that she really cares, that she makes decisive action, that she really meets things head on. As far as that, you know, in 9/11, you know, there's a lot of people, for example, that didn't have a great view of George W. Bush, but the way he managed things head on, he went right to New York, he was out there with everybody, really brought a lot of people. He gained a lot of favor with them. Even Boris Johnson. I'm not gonna talk about. I don't want to get into any specifics about whether people like or don't like Boris Johnson, but the fact is she did show some vulnerability about praising the NHS and talking about specific people and really giving a lot of thanks. And I thought that showed some vulnerability and some openness from him. And my wife also follows Russell Brand, and Russell Brand, who doesn't like Boris Johnson, even wrote a letter and he had a couple compliments in there. So, you know, that's what I talk about, where you can be made, and actually going back to World War II, hopefully you guys know this better than I, there was Churchill got voted in because of the other guy who wasn't really meeting this head on. Chamberlain was his name. The World War II Prime Minister, or the Prime Minister before Churchill and for the UK, really wasn't being that type of leader. A lot of people thought that might be needed, and that's how Churchill got in. So, you know, your Neville Chamberlain, is that it? And somebody give me a chat, yes or no. That was it. So a lot of people, at the end of the day, the crises are going to bring out the best or the worst in a lot of people, and it's important to make sure it brings out your best. I think so. Thanks. for that. So Chris had a question here. I just put up the chat. How do we avoid forcing people to be positive? I've often been forced to look positive and motivated by managers or HR, which has caused me a lot of stress and sometimes pushed me to leave. Well, you don't want to force people to be positive. I don't believe you should force people to be positive. It's important for you to have a positive and optimistic outlook. And if you don't have that, then you need, honestly, some coaching. Because if you are, as a leader, are showing up and not being positive, it's going to no matter what it is, your job as a leader is to, and when I say positive, you want to be authentic and you want to say, hey, this is a difficult situation. You don't want to lie about things. You could say, look, this is the hardest thing we've ever been through, but there's always a way out. So it's important for you to always show a forward way. You don't even sometimes have to give specifics to it. And you as a leader, you have to show up with that positive energy. If you don't, honestly, send me a note and we need to get on some one-on-one coaching to get you to that place. Now, when it comes to your team, if people are being negative, it's up to you. There's ways for you to coach them to be positive, because there's always lessons, there's always positive, there's always a way forward in any situation. And you as a leader, it's up to you to coach people to look at those things. And if they consistently come up to be negative, if they consistently find problems, they need coaching. So whether it's you're giving them coaching or you bring in an outside coach. And I realize I'm a coach saying this, but that is what you need. When I was a business leader, I had coaches, because it's not, you as a business leader can give some coaching to the team, but there's also this dynamic that your coaching only goes so far. Sometimes you need a third party, a neutral party to really get there. Another question. I have questions about how do we build trust, transparency in a team, especially when building distributed teams where people are not full-time, etc. Well, that's a great question. You build teams by being authentic. When I say authentic, you tell them what you're thinking, and you tell them to them as a positive way and a direct way. And again, just by mentioning that this is a difficult time, you might talk about how you've been under some stress. But again, when you talk about being vulnerable, there's a healthy way to be vulnerable and an unhealthy way to be vulnerable. Vulnerability doesn't mean you throwing up all your problems over everybody all the time. It's admitting that you're not perfect. It's admitting, like I talked about, how I went through a difficult time in Singapore. I talk about how I wasn't perfect. So trust is built by calling it as it is. Maybe you made a decision that wasn't great. You say, hey, I know I told you this last week, that wasn't correct. I made the wrong assumption. They're like, oh my gosh, this person can actually stand in front of us and tell us that they made a mistake. They're like, okay, I trust that person because they're calling it out. And there's a lot that we can talk about trust and transparency in teams. The only way for you to, the true way for you to get other people to do it is for you to do it yourself and for you to embrace it. So when it comes about commitments, and another about trust in teams, is for you to make commitments and you to nail those commitments each and every time, and for you to be specific about other people's commitments and hold them accountable. So then there's a lot we could do on there. What else do we got? Any other? Great. I think that's it on the chat as far as questions. Any other questions? Anybody can just pop in and take their mute off, I think, or Matt can help facilitate that. I'm happy to answer a couple more questions before we call it a day here.
Yeah, anyone can just jump in if they've got a question. No restrictions on the mute.
Cool. All right, everybody, you are happy to drop me an email. I always like that. Happy to connect with me on LinkedIn. Download those slides. If the survey is right for you, let's have a quick chat about what that looks like about implementing it. I'm R. Michael Anderson. Again, this is a difficult time. It's okay to be a difficult time. Now's the time to be your best. It's people need our leadership during these times. Thanks, Matt, for having me. Thanks, everybody, and I'm sure we'll catch you when all this is over. We'll have a drink together.